Powered by Go-Goat Sports in partnership with TSN. This is episode 36, season 4 of the Dregs Hockey Podcast. And as always, presented by our title sponsor, Canadian Club Whiskey, an exciting podcast. They're all really good, but this one's exciting because joining us on the podcast is former Anaheim Ducks star center, 2007 Stanley Cup champion, Ryan Getzlaf, enjoying full retirement mode. So we'll talk to Getzy about that. And by the way, you know, not to give up too much, just a little glimpse here. He was kind enough. We had to delay the recording of the interview just a whisker because you had an interaction with a police officer. So don't spoil it. This is a tease.
I'll just say right? my driving leaves something to be desired.
Evidently so, yes. All right. So Ryan Getzlaf will get a chuckle out of that, I'm sure. So that's coming up. Headlines again this season presented by our good friends at Boston Pizza. I don't know if you had time last night, Ray. I'm going to start headlines with the CHL Prospects Game. I watched parts of it. I didn't glue myself to the television set, even though, you know, it was supposed to be the Connor Bedard show, right? Instead, Bedard is pointless in the Prospects Game, but man, that game had some bite. It was feisty. It was competitive. It was everything that if you're a pro scout or an NHL general manager, and there were many of them in Langley for the CHL Prospects Game, aside from Bedard lightening up one more time, I don't think we need to see more offense from Connor Bedard to know what he's all about. But from a competitive aspect, holy smokes, that game had some bite. It was entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, Bedard could have played left-handed.
Yeah.
It's not going to change where he's going. But for the other players, it's an opportunity to play against the top end of your draft class. And what's important about it is, I mean, somebody doesn't get dropped off a team's draft list or put on a team's draft list from that game. But if you have a good performance, I believe teams might look at you in a different light. And as they get into the second half of the season, what happens with almost every team is they have scouts that are crossover scouts. So scouts that watch the Ontario League only, they'll go start watching the Western League. And scouts that watch a Western League will go watch the Quebec League. So they're all crisscrossing views, and they start to zero in on players. And those players that had the opportunity to play in the Prospects Game, they have a chance to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, don't forget about me over here, and maybe push themselves into a different spot.
Right. And that's important to acknowledge. And that was probably the case. You know, it's far from the finish line of where these kids are developmentally. They still have a lot of hockey to go this year before teams have to make their decision. But lots of NHL clubs have come out of their amateur meetings. They're into pro meetings now and whatnot. So it is an important game and an important time of year. So let's look at the standings. Okay. I'm watching the Islanders in a funk. I think that's fair to describe where they've been now for the last 10, 12 games. You've got the Washington Capitals, the St. Louis Blues. Caps are holding on tight. St. Louis is nibbling outside the playoff picture, but, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. Why are you watching those three teams in particular? Is it just simply because the trade deadline is looming and there's some big decisions that need to be made here?
Yes, but also with age for those teams. So, Washington's in the second wild card. They're 3 points up on Buffalo. Buffalo's got 3 games in hand. So if you're Brian McClellan and the Washington Capitals, do you say, maybe I could push a little more of my future out and try and, get ourselves into the playoffs now? But if you get into the playoffs, as it sits, you'd play Boston. Are you going to beat Boston? Well, as it sits today, no, you're just not. So, the Islanders, they're just not, they don't seem like they have the same connection to the system that they have always had under Barry Trotz. And part of the reason is the system changed. Lane Lambert wants to play a little bit more up-tempo, which is, I would say, more of a modern game. And they might not have the personnel to play that, or they might not be as connected to the system as they were in the past. So if you're Lou Lamoriello, who didn't get very much done at all in the summer, do you make a move now, or do you move to say, you know what, maybe we should move some of our veterans? Same thing in St. Louis. Tarasenko, O'Reilly would be coveted trade chips for Doug Armstrong. They signed last summer Kyrou and Thomas to 8-year extensions.
Yeah.
Clearly the future's somewhere else. So, that's a decision they're going to have to make. And time gets short here. I mean, what is it now? 26th of January. Your teams are really cementing in their plans here in the next little bit. And those are 3 teams I'd be watching and will be watching for sure.
Let's throw the Los Angeles Kings into that equation, right? And
for a different reason.
For a completely different reason. I don't, Rob Blake addressed the Cal Peterson thing earlier this year. We put him on waivers, sent him to the American League on a conditioning stint, trying to get his game back, the confidence up and whatnot. But man, generally speaking, the Kings goaltending, it stinks. It hasn't been good enough. And when you look at the play of LA, would that be your biggest issue, your biggest concern there?
Yeah, I know there's lots of chatter, and you've reported on their potential interest in Jacob Chychrun and what that deal might look like. They're right at the top of the topsy-turvy Pacific Division.
Yeah.
They're 1 point behind Seattle. Again, Seattle's got games in hand on them. But what if they had a goalie? Like, I know their interest, I understand if there is interest in Chychrun, but what if there was a goalie? I watched this week in Edmonton, or rather in Calgary, and Jonas Korpisalo was unbelievable. I couldn't believe how good he was. It was the only reason that game was close. He was terrific last night again in Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
They have a youngster in Tarasov, and they've got Merzlikins locked up for a few more years, who's had a really difficult year. So they could move Korpisalo, free agent at the end of the year. That's a possibility. What if the deal with Arizona included Karel Vejmelka? Now, that guy looks like a ball hockey goalie to me. Like, I don't get it, but oh my gosh, he stops the puck. Because the Kings have a good team. They have a team that you really probably don't want to play against too much, but Phoenix Copley's their best goalie, and that's not going to push you too far.
No. All right, why don't we wrap up headlines? Again, we've got Ryan Getzlaf coming up, so that'll be the bulk of episode 36 of the Ray and Dregs podcast shortly. But Mitch Marner asked reporters yesterday, so being Wednesday, Bell Let's Talk Day, to hang in after a scrum. And, so often we see people of influence, be it athletes, doesn't matter particularly who it is, but get on board with Bell Let's Talk, right? Deliver the message and raise the level of awareness and whatnot. This was different for me in watching it. And Marner put a real personal twist on it. He said, look, to the assembled media in the scrum, just hold on a sec. I want to say a few words about my position here on mental health. Clearly it was in support of Bell Let's Talk, but he took some time to explain to the gaggle of media that, hey, he's a pro hockey player. His life is great, but he's not without struggle, right? And he's had some mental health issues. And, he gave the example of going back to where he got carjacked last summer. I mean, it had to have been terrifying for him, obviously, and how that still bothers him to this day. So even though this has been this big corporate entity, which draws a lot of negativity out of people, to be fair, most of it is dispensed on social media. When I hear somebody like Mitch Marner take us into his world, right, into his personal experience in support, for me, that's the silver lining in all of it, right, is the good things, the messaging that comes in continuing to help raise awareness.
Well, there's there's a phrase, something through my meditation that you learn is that, everybody's got something. Everybody has a struggle somewhere. The book is not open to read. So people are struggling that you might never really have an idea about.
Mm-hmm.
And, Kelly Rudy has been very notable in
Terrific
his
ambassador.
support and
Yeah.
discussion of mental health. Now, Mitch Marner comes out and talks about his challenges. Some people are more public with it than others. You know, I mean, for myself, it's been a 5 or 6 year journey to try and get to a different place. And you'll never change some people's perceptions of you, but that really can't be what it's about. But the struggle is, and challenge and bumps in your own life, not everybody knows about it. Nobody knows about what you go through. Nobody knows what, Mitch Marner or anybody. You do not have to be a public person to have your own way and your own struggle and your own journey. And so if they can perhaps put a face to it and their support, maybe it makes people who live a quieter life feel it's okay to explore helping themselves.
Well said, my friend. Those are your headlines. Again, thank you to Boston Pizza.